I'm Fatima Rahiman from Sadie, and I've had to step in for Dani. So I'm going to be chairing this session. This is a session that we have in all our conferences, and as we mentioned earlier on, we have decided to listen to the evaluation feedback and give more time to our speakers. So at the same time, I wish to tell our presenters that they only have 20 minutes per paper, so I must please urge the presenters to keep to their time. And first on our session, we're very proud to have Sboniso Ngcobo from DUT. Now, Sboniso will be presenting a topic on food security, and if you explore our website, you'll see that food security has become quite a topical issue there, with more resources being added in the last year. And this was primarily, I think, run by or spurred on by DUT's presentation last year, where you profile the work of DUT in this area through the Siyaphumelela program. But just also to add, this is a project that Sboniso has been doing on his own. Yeah? So we're very, very proud to have him, and he's presenting on his own here too. So everyone, let's give him a good, warm welcome. Thank you.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to take you through to my presentation this afternoon on an exploration of food insecurity among students in University of Technology and holistic intervention approach. To begin with, ladies and gentlemen, I just decided to have this picture of my classmates. And simple because my classmates, it was on a day of our graduation, and we all look so happy. We are so excited. And I was just wondering one thing. And by putting this picture is to say to you, lecturers, these are the people that the community is looking for you to produce. These people. And the community is happy when it sees us coming back into our community with a diploma or with a paper. But a community is more happy when we are able to contribute into our communities or to transform into our communities. So the question is, how, if we are expected to transform our communities, and if we happen maybe to be not eating as we suppose, and by some reasons we don't able to sustain our health, that means we are going to die before time, right? Though we have a document or a diploma, but we are going to die before time, and by that time we would have not able to have transform our communities, and we would have not able to contribute into the economy of our country. So, ladies and gentlemen, as a student, as you can see, this is me and my friend Musa over there. I decided to put this picture, simple because when you look at the picture, you can see that both me and my friend look so shocked. And the question is, we're supposed to be happy, but why we are not happy? Because we are asking ourselves how we have managed to make it. So when I'm saying how we have managed to make it, so to us, with Musa, my friend, the issue, it would have been how we have managed to make it without food. So it could be the problem of food. But the other thing that came into my mind is I started to ask myself. I said, to me, with a student who has experienced maybe the problems around poverty, but with other students within our campuses who are better students, their problem is not the same as our problems, but their problems, it would be with the quality of the food that they eat. So, ladies and gentlemen, okay, I'm hoping that I'm doing very well. Okay. Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, I decided to. Okay, I wish I can just move around. You can hear me, right? Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just decided and I asked myself that, okay, if me and Musa, our problem, it will have to do with poverty. Or we're gonna be our aim will be saying, if I can just have food, then all my problems will be solved. That means I can make it, I can pass my modules. But with other students, it's another problem. The student who have it all would say, if I can have a healthy food so that I can able to concentrate in class. So both the students who have it all and who have it all, their problems is with food. But with us, Musa, it will be poverty and it will be with quality. But when it comes into student success, ladies and gentlemen, it has nothing to do with only us, the vulnerable group, but it has to do with all students, the students who have it all and the students who don't have it all. So what do we do in our university to make sure that we give, we are fair to both students who have it all and students who do not have it all? So I started to say to myself, then if in our university we are saying we are focusing on food security, then we need to start understanding what food security is. Yes, to the vulnerable group, it could simply means getting rid of hunger. But to the group that is not vulnerable, it could also mean it has to do with the nutritional value of food, and it will also have to do with also the safety of food in order for students to be able to maintain their health and in order to be able to be active in class. So, ladies and gentlemen, as an expert in nutrition, then I said, for a student to be food secure in our universities, these are things that need to be in place. These three things that they need to be in place. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, the student should have a nutritional adequate food at all time, And another thing, even the food that the student eats, it should also have a positive impact in their lives. And thirdly, it should also, when we speak, ladies and gentlemen, of the adequacy of food, we should not only pay attention only on quality, which is has to do with getting rid of hunger, but we should also focus on the quality of food. So these are three things that I said, then they should be in place. Then I said, that made me, ladies and gentlemen, to say, so the holistical approach to food security, it makes it necessary to access this following: the availability of food in our campuses. So in terms of, do the students have food? I'm talking about nutritious food, not in terms of, okay, yes, students do have food available, but is it the food nutritious? Then secondly, do students able to afford the food that is available? And thirdly, the other question, the utilization, whereby we're starting asking ourselves, do students able to manage their food in terms of making sure that the food is safe, and in terms of making sure that the food is not wasted? And I'm just imagining, what if a student, because of poor storage of food, he can't attend a class because at some point he happened to eat a food that was off. So, ladies and gentlemen, now as I was working now in the office with the office of Siyaphumelela, I started planning the project's food security, and I planned it in these three phases, which is the survey, and the roadshow, and the booklets. And the survey was very important, ladies and gentlemen, because we needed to understand our community in order to make sure that the intervention that we bring into our community community or into our campuses is exactly the intervention that is needed in our campuses. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, with this survey, we started looking at we're looking at these three things. We're looking at the eating habits of students, we're looking at the coping strategies, and we're looking at their food choices. When we were collecting our survey, ladies and gentlemen, we started to about 617 students responded in our survey, and these were results, ladies and gentlemen. So when students were asked in terms of rationing the food available, so here we are checking in terms of what happened in a month. What students do in order to manage the shortfall of food. Then these were results. The student indicated that about 80% of students within the month, they happened to cut the size of meal. So if the student have to eat 3 meals, if the student have to eat 3 meals, so if the student have to, if the size of a meal is supposed to be of this size, so the student will start reducing the size to be of this size. And we also pick it up that about 40% of students indicated that they skipped the entire day without having a meal. And thirdly, we also pick it up that some of the students indicated that they will reduce the number of meals. So if they're supposed to have 3 meals, in order to have meals until the end of the month, they will start to have 2 meals or 1 meal a day. Then our survey also indicated that most of the students, about 20% of our students, they started to sell their valuable item in order to manage to have food. And also, the survey indicated that about only 21% of our students, they ask for food assistance. And the question is, if about 40% of our students, they skip the entire day without food, but only 21% who have within the month able to ask for food assistance. So the question is, then what happened with the rest of the students? That's help us then when we're analyzing. Then lastly, the data also showed us that the student, because of not having or trying to maintain food to maintain the food, about 89% they start switching from the food that is preferable into the food that is not preferable. And 84% shift into the food that is less preferable food. And another thing that we started picking up, ladies and gentlemen, was that about 60% of our students at DUT they are sorted financially, because about 56% of students are financial aid students and 10% are funded by bursaries. So only about 25% who are self-payers, meaning that who are paid, their source of food is paid by their parents. So the question is, if about 60% of students, they are covered by NSFAS, or 60% is covered, then the question is, then how come that about 40% of our students, they go without food? So supposingly, we're supposed to calculate about 25%, or about actually 9 or 25% of students who go without food the entire day. But we are counting about 40% of students who go without food. So the question is, what happens with the money that the student have. So, ladies and gentlemen, this was the intervention that we developed. The ubuqabamvu, the roadshow that was focusing on the roadshow was just focusing on educating students in terms of eating healthily. And it also indicates, it teaches students in terms of how to manage their finances. Because if the student, they have money and they do not budget for food, that makes them at the end of the month to not able to have enough food. So ladies and gentlemen, I decided to share this. So with the data that we have, we decided that this is the intervention that we can bring to students, the intervention that will educate students in terms of eating healthily, the intervention that will teach the student in terms of managing their finances in order to have money. Then the second intervention, then is the booklet. Then we decided to say, okay, what about now developing a booklet that can also assist students around eating healthily? And this was the booklet that is aimed to assist students as they plan, as they shop, as they prepare, and as they cook, and as they eat their healthy meals. And the booklet, ladies and gentlemen, it's look like this. So it has recipes these recipes are just recipes that can allow students within their limited budgets to have food, within healthy food, within their limited budgets. And it also covers not only about food, but it also touches also the importance of exercising. And we picked these ideas from our South African guideline. Then lastly, the booklet, it's our plan of action for this year or the second semester, which is the roadshow. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Sboniso. It's a very impassioned presentation. Are there any questions? Sorry, my apologies, folks. I said we started at 4:45. We still have some time. I was a bit too eager. Jenny?
At the moment, it has just went for printing, and we are hoping that it's going to be available in a hard copy for the students in our campuses. But also, we are planning to have it available electronically. Yeah, so it's going to be available, and yeah, we can allow that.
Yeah, I initially thanked him for a wonderful presentation. Initially in your presentation, you used the terms students who have it all and students who don't have. So what do you actually mean by students who have it all?
Okay.
Why and why did you choose that term?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
When I say the student who have it all, I was trying to not use the terms like the student who have it all. A student that I may say they are not struggling around food insecurity. They are not struggling around food security. And students who do not have it all, I was trying to avoid to use the term student who are in poverty by just using the student who are, who do not have it all. So they do not have it all. They have it, but not all. Just to avoid using the term poverty.
Over tea. Okay. Thanks, Sboniso. Any other questions? one more, and then we need to proceed.
Afternoon, Sboniso. I just wanted to ask, how many people were you able to reach in terms of the pilot intervention that you introduced to us?
Pardon?
How many people were you able to reach in the intervention that you described earlier?
The roadshow intervention.
Yes.
We visited about 3 student residences. And in our first intervention, or our first res, we interacted with about, it was 53 students. And with the other, it was in total, because the 2 other residents came together, then it came into a total of 73 students.
Okay. Thank you so much, Sboniso. This is excellent. Thank you. Okay, so bums on seats is an issue that plagues lots of higher ed institutions. I know internationally and in the South African context, it probably has a different meaning. But let's hear what Sivuyil Nzimeni from UFS has to say. Sivuyil, thank you. Oh, sorry, I didn't see. Okay, and you're going to be talking about enrollment versus attendance. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sivuyil Nzimeni. I'm the Teaching and Learning Coordinator for the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences at the University of the Free State. And I'll be presenting on some of the initial work that I've started looking into for the faculty and the broader tutorial program at large in terms of the implications of tutorial attendance to the costs that go into it. So the inputs that we have on it, and what the outcomes are after we factor in the tutorial attendance. Now, I have a few keywords I want to start off with. Firstly, this is just the initial part, so please be kind to my presentation. And secondly, I've used relatively crude, and crude being just a relative term here, to sort of look into these costs. So I'm using averaging a lot with the aim of trying to just look at initially what are the cost implications around the tutorial and what impact the tutorial attendance have. So I'll go through these points by firstly highlighting the scale of the tutorial program, and then going a bit further by looking at what happens when we plan using enrollment numbers and what happens in the actual tutorials in terms of the fluctuations in tutorial attendance. Okay. Now, I hope some of this is visible to you, but you'll see we had 11 modules last year in the Faculty of Economic and Management Sciences. On average, we had 517 students enrolled in the modules. There are larger modules which we identify as at risk, right? And we then try to enroll, or rather recruit tutors based on these enrollment numbers. And what I've shared with you there are the enrollment numbers, the pass rate of those modules, and in 2017, enrollment numbers, the pass rate of those modules in 2018. On average, we had an increase in success rates of 7.34%, and that's not due only to the tutorial. There are other factors that factor into it, but we do see that there's a positive trend when we have tutorials in certain modules. So what we do initially when we start the recruitment of tutors is look at the enrollment numbers. So module 1's number of tutors is determined by the number of students enrolled in that program. And we try to aim for, give or take, or a range of one student, or rather one tutor per 40 or 30 students. And it varies across the board. In some cases, due to budgetary constraints, we can't hire as many people as we'd like, otherwise we'd have an army of tutors and rebels of academics, or something like that. So to avoid that scenario, we do try and accommodate for the budgetary constraints. Now, this gives us the initial tutor to student ratio at enrollment. So this is before the tutorials take place. But in order to drill down into what happens in the tutorial, a few things had to happen. The first was we had to integrate 3 databases. The one is our tutorial session database, and Evodia mentioned this in the earlier workshop, where we try to capture our tutorial as regularly as possible and to increase the speed with which you do that so that we can have something that's as close to live data as possible, right? And then we integrated that with the tutor payment database, and this is after the fact. So once the tutorials has occurred and the attendance registers have been captured and the tutors have been paid, what are the costs per session, costs per module, and costs at a faculty level? Because we can only extrapolate that once we've done the payments process. Then we also had to integrate the institutional database. And this institutional database contains the biographical information of the students, which modules are they registered in, and that gives us a clear indication of how frequent a student uses the tutorial services. And once we integrate these 3 databases, we can then generate a number of indicators. And these indicators I've put forward here are specifically around tutorials and the impact of them. So we have the tutorial attendance pattern, which is coming up on the next slide, and that is just an overall view of what happens in the tutorial throughout the semester for one module. So week on week, what does tutorial look like? Then we have the accretion/retention rate. And this is a more student-specific indicator where we look at, if you take student X on week 1, how many times are they likely to return to the tutorial? How many times are they likely to drop out from attending further tutorial sessions? Then we have the cost per attendee, and this is, again, a crude measure where we look at if you take a given session, the number of students there, and the cost of the tutor in front of them, how much does it cost? So I'll just take this room, not that I'm a tutor, you're my students, but I'll take this room and divide the cost per hour of the tutor by the number of attendees. And then we do that across our programs. And then we have the average cost per module, and that's taken from that data between those 3, and the average attendance per attendee, and that's also just a crude measure of, if we take our full tutorial database and look at the sessions that they attended, how many times are the students returning? And on average in the EMS faculty, students return 4 times. And that's a concern because our capacity is actually 3 times that in most modules. So that's where the indicator becomes very crucial. Now, the next slide, I just need to give you a warning beforehand, maybe highlight why it's important to me. The next slide is the attendance pattern for one of our modules. And the reason I've decided to share this with you is to show you what happens from what we planned versus what occurs in the tutorial, because this is frequent throughout our modules. Now, I've named this module X, just to hide their identity. But what you'll see there, in the first 3 weeks of tutorials, we have an increase, right? Which is good. So when I walk past the tutorial session, I'm usually very happy, and I go back to the office a bit happier. But when we get to the 3rd week, there's a big drop, a massive drop. And it just, luckily for this module, it went up slightly. But for most modules, it drops significantly, and it stays at low levels. And it only increases in the 2 weeks prior to exam again. So from a planning perspective, we say there are 1,000 students enrolled in a module, therefore we will hire, say for argument's sake, 14 people to tutor them, and for the first 3 weeks, that plan works out perfectly, right? Because the ratios are exactly what we'd like to see, but after that, they drop significantly. And that has cost implications, because now the cost per head can go from 3 rand per student in the session to as high as 40, 50 rand per student in the session. And it's sustained over time. And this means that from a cost efficiency perspective, we're not really using it, we're not really using the cents or the rands that the institution provides to us efficiently. So what does it look like for the rest of the modules under A-STEP and AMS? As you'll see, on average, our costs are around 18 Rand 16 cents, and for the most part, most of our modules stay below that. But there are these outliers that are of big concern to me, and there are certain factors that explain those outliers. So once we've done with the semester, we usually have an evaluation, and we ask students, why didn't you attend tutorials? What made you attend tutorials? One of the big issues that came out was timetable restrictions. I need to sit back and evaluate, do I attend this tutorial that's gonna be at 5 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, or do I go home, right? And that's a very difficult constraint to overcome as a tutorial program, because that's not necessarily something within our control. So the content of the tutorial is not necessarily, actually, if you look at the three main reasons why people don't attend tutorials, it's not the content of it, it's other external factors, right? And those external factors tend to factor into why attendance is low in some of these tutorials. Another reason is lecturer involvement. In the modules where the lecturers are really involved in the activity building, in the planning for the tutorial sessions, or so forth, their costs are significantly lower than others, and the reason for that is primarily the communication to the students are consistent, it's clear, they know what's going to happen, and the planning for the tutorial sessions is paced out well enough for the students to adapt to. So we do see these differences between those type of modules and the others. And that's why you have some of these outliers. So this overall, so when I looked at it, looked at the costs, I also picked up a few challenges, and these related to the continuity of income for tutors. So just to give a bit of background on this, we usually pay our tutors using an ad hoc payment system. And when you look at those numbers from last year, yes, the income in terms of value is large, but it's staggered through the year. So it's not consistent, it's not on a monthly basis. So the tutor said in one of our planning sessions, I'd rather prefer I get paid a lower amount because they know about the budgetary constraints, but it's consistent on a monthly basis. So when we try to attend to this cost issues, we had to keep that in mind. And then the second part is around the financial sustainability of the tutorial program. We need to manage the cost escalations that come with these outliers in order for us to know, for budgeting purposes, if next year we have a 4%, 5%, 6% increase in our budget, why? Especially if the attendance is not as high as it should be. Why should our costs increase year on year, but our attendance is dropping? So those are the sort of things that we had to also consider. And then there's the student indicators. As I mentioned, on average, our students attend 4 tutorials over the semester, and that's not up to standard in terms of the amount of sessions that we offer. So we're really not performing at optimal capacity. So we should try and find ways to draw the students back into the tutorial sessions and sustain that over time. Now, these are some of the interventions that we've done to try and mitigate the impact of this. The first is increasing personalized and timely communication to students. And this is linked to Siyaphumelela from last year around the nudging campaign, where this year we've tried to send out communication that's more personalized. So rather than sending out a generic email to a student, we write out personalized email saying, you've done X, and this is the number of sessions that you've attended, thank you for this, or your colleagues are attending X amount of tutorials over time, and so forth, right? So we are definitely going to continue building on that in terms of communicating in a timely fashion and in a personalized manner with the students in terms of marketing the tutorial program. And then we also built in mentor and Saturday sessions, and the idea behind this is basically relying back on the SI principles, where the idea behind the mentor sessions is there's no lecturer involvement to that extent. They largely go to the mentor sessions and they talk to their mentor that's been allocated to them about any part of the academic work that they don't understand. They can talk to them about any part of the university. Say a student doesn't know how to access financial aid. They can talk to their mentor about that, because the mentor is a person recruited within the program that this first-year student is studying towards. So they do have experience about where to access some of these resources. And that mentor session is intended for that. And then we also have Saturday sessions, and we're going to be moving them because the feedback from students was the Saturday sessions don't work. But in the content of the Saturday sessions, we focused on the holistic development of economic and management sciences students. So when you talk about your identity, your career identity as an EMS student, what do you mean? What made you study towards a EMS degree? So those are the sort of things that we try and focus on, and exam strategies and so forth. And linked to the mentor session and Saturday sessions, we also started recruiting tutors based on their program and not necessarily the module. And this is linked to a person who tutors according to the module that they've done is not necessarily going to be aware of what happens next year. And some of the questions that the students may have will be, what happens next year in economics 2? You know, what happens the year after that? Will I be able to cope and so forth? So those are the sort of things that we've been able to avert by hiring on a program-specific basis. And the monthly remuneration versus ad hoc, I think I've touched on that. And then we're also looking at increasing lecturer involvement. And the way we've gone about this is the activity building of the practical sessions that lecturers have, the tutors are involved in that. So we're building that collaborative relationship between the two parties. And we're also asking the lecturers to communicate more about the tutorial sessions. So they highlight when tutorial sessions are going to occur. They highlight when what content is going to be done in future in the tutorial sessions. And the role of the lecturer is crucial because the number one source in our evaluation forms from students about where they found out about tutorials is from a lecturer, right? So we are trying to integrate these 5 interventions into one program, and the idea behind it is ultimately we're trying to increase the usage rate. I want to apologize for using economic and management sciences references. By usage rate, I mean the frequency with which the students utilize the tutorial sessions. That's the ultimate goal, because if you can increase the numbers in the tutorial sessions, then we'll be able to justify some of the costs that go into it. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sibuyil. It's really, really interesting. Any questions from the floor? Great, thanks.
Thanks very much for that. Ashton Maheri from DUT. We have a challenge with login attendance for tutorials. And by challenge, I mean it doesn't happen. So how have you overcome this?
Okay. In terms of the tutorials and capturing that, what we've tried to do is, first of all, it's in our training, it's consistently communicated to the tutors that an attendance register is our bread and butter. So it's crucial that they submit that frequently, and they submit it as soon as possible. So immediately after the tutorial session, they go to our office, and Kaya, who is the intern at EMS, will capture that on our Oracle system. And then once all the capturing is done, what I usually do, because data is my bread and butter, I then go and download the CSV file to try and pull out some of the student indicators. Yeah. So I think in order to be able to do that, the best method would be to make it a part of the process. Reinforce the idea that without attendance registers, the tutorial system doesn't exist, essentially. Yeah. And you don't get paid. And that's another matter I didn't raise. We make it very clear to the tutors that without an attendance register, we have no proof that the session occurred, therefore we can't pay you for that session. Yes.
Thank you, Sivuyil. I don't know whether it's a question or a comment. I appreciate the interventions that you have spelled out. At the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned 7% academic improvement. And I'm just trying to ascertain weighing these options of the costs that are escalating versus the benefits of those? What is your strategy going forward? Are you going to stick to, I know we have to stress too much about cost, but how do you balance these two, the value of the improvement versus the cost implications?
I think, and I spoke to Yvonne about this as well earlier, I'm a very sequential person when I think about things. So this is the initial stage. I think the next stage will be linking the improvement, not only on the overall student success rate, where you try and eliminate other factors. So let's see what the correlation is at basic level between the modules that are involved in our tutorial program and those that are not. And then let's try and isolate additional factors and focus on the real impact that the tutorials have. And then once you have that impact and you establish the cost of that, you compare it to the outcome for the module. So what subsidy do they receive down the line? And then you try and show, and I think this goes a long way in convincing lecturers and faculty that there is a clear link between the two. And the ultimate beneficiary, essentially, is the faculty itself. So I think to justify the cost, we need to link it to the outcome down the line, i.e. the subsidy increase that the module or the department will receive once they increase their success rates.
Okay, before we proceed to the last question, could I just ask the next two presenters to proceed to the podium, please? We're already running behind time.
I've just got two quick questions. Are the tutorial groups compulsory? And then the second question is, how do you measure the amount of students actually in tutorials and versus on the attendance register? Because I know at VITS, students usually sign for other students. Yeah. So there's a discrepancy between the two.
Yeah, so on the first point, our tutorials are not compulsory, but some of them are linked to an assessment. So some lecturers say if you attended X amount of tutorials over time, you could get, say, 5-10% towards your predicate. And on the second point, yes, that is a concern where you have people signing in for others, and we are currently piloting a scanning system where we get the student's card specifically. We scan that and we save it on an Excel, and then we upload that on the data management system at a later date. So in order to control that issue, we are piloting the scanners to try and mitigate that risk. Yeah.
Any other questions? I don't think the next two presenters are here, so yeah.
Thank you. If you look at the range on your first slide of the improvement, it was quite big, from -14, I think, yes, all the way to 25. Have you any explanations for why it should have such a wide range?
Yes. There are a couple of, let me put it this way, there are a couple of keywords that I want to make clear. So the first is, we are coming from a relatively low base compared to historically. So 2016 and the effect of that carried over from 2016 to 2017. So an element of that is linked to those changes. But there are certain modules that can be explained by practical actions that occurred throughout the semester. The first is in the modules where we have significant increases, one of our public administration modules, the lecturer really let the tutors take the lead in terms of the content of the whole program throughout the semester. So that means the lecturer almost took I'll help you with some of the drafting of the practicals, but you do everything and you experiment. And that was something that we hadn't seen before, but the value of it was extremely important. And at one point, specifically with those modules, the students said, no, these activities don't work for us. And we discarded everything that they'd come up with. We started from scratch, and attendance started picking up again. So that sort of collaboration is has a very important explanatory value there. Yeah. And in other modules, I think most lecturers have been part of the tutorial program, so they know the flow, they know what commitments they need to offer, and therefore the whole flow of the program is much better than in other modules because the commitment is there. I think that's the key term, the collaboration and the commitment is there. So once all those parts work in tandem, then they mitigate the effects of the other explanatory values. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? That's good.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for a very interesting presentation, because we are also at DUT wanting to actually pilot some sort of monitoring and evaluation of our tutorial program, because it hasn't been done really in any sort of consistent manner. I had two questions. I should have written the first one down. The second one was just around language, because there has been work done in some of our faculties where they've asked for feedback from students as to what makes a tutorial effective. And some of the feedback indicates where the tutors are actually explaining content in home language. I just wondered, although it's not directly related to what you're doing, have you all found anything like that? Are you all monitoring anything like that? And if the first question comes back to my mind, senior moment, I'll ask that to you again later.
There are two cases that are specifically referring to home language. So we have been piloting, as a faculty, we've been rolling out rather a new language policy which leans towards English, but we do try and incorporate as much of the language, other languages as possible. So the language of instruction is English, but the interaction in the classes include other languages. So when we tried that in a few of our modules, the response was actually not what we expected, because the students said they preferred English, even though we had these options available to them. Especially in the first few weeks of the tutorials, they came back almost unanimously saying we prefer the language of instruction to be English in the tutorial sessions. So that was a surprise to us. But that's one thing that we picked up with regards to the language in the tutorial sessions. Yeah. Nice.
Your moment's gone.
And another one came to mind as well.
Oh, great.
Those modules that you actually presented, what level were they?
First year level.
They were all first
Yes.
level, okay. My initial question was, in terms of your tutor selection, I like the idea that you said you moved away from module to, this is a tutor who was in the program. What other criteria did you use are you all using for selecting tutors?
So our biggest criteria is around the academics. So we usually use an average of 65% in the module that the person is going to tutor, and we also look at their overall academic record, and then we incorporate the leadership if they've done any other co-curricular activities around campus. That also forms part of it, and we go through an interview process, and that is to look at, is the student really committed to teaching and learning? What other interests do they have? And once we're done with that, we do training so that we get the message right, we get the principles right around the tutoring. And so our biggest criteria is the academic and their previous leadership abilities and how they performed in that particular module. Because a BCom economics student is not necessarily going to tutor all of the modules, but if they're going to tutor economics in the first semester, then they need to have performed at least 65% level. In some cases, we have hired people who haven't performed at that level, but that's part of the interview process where you see that the person has a passion for teaching and learning. And actually, they're among our top performers as tutors. Yeah. So we do need to have a bit of flexibility around that.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
I just wanted to find out, do tutors at any level, do they engage in the learning management systems with lecturers in any online learning, sort of in terms of facilitating?
Yes, they do.
They do?
Yes, we do have online tutors, and they also receive training on that prior to the start of the semester, and they facilitate online tutorials, especially in our industrial psychology modules in the first year.
Oh, okay.
Yes, so we had about 1,100 students participate in this semester of our students participating in the Blackboard LMS system.
I see. Excellent. Thanks. Okay. We're exploiting you.
I can see.
I'm Elizabeth Ndofilepi from Wits University. In the case of students or tutors who do not perform, throughout the year, but they are tutors, but they are not performing themselves, although at recruitment they were good. What do you do? Do you keep them? Do you advise them to stop tutoring and concentrate on their studies? That's my first question. Then my second question is, do you take the same, or maybe do you recruit students from the previous year as well, or each year you've got a new set of students? And if you are recruiting, the same students and maybe new students, do they go through the same training?
On the first question around the performance of the tutors themselves, so last year after the first semester, it was based on the hunch. I didn't have any real data on it. So I pulled their academic records and I compared their performance in 2017 versus 2018. And on average, their performance had decreased by 5%. Now, one could explain that as it's a higher NQF level, therefore there's a bit more demand on them, but there was an element where I was uncomfortable with the fact that they're tutoring, therefore they have less time to study. So to try and assist them, what I did is collaborate with a colleague of mine at Academic Advising and asked her to please schedule the tutors into her consultation hours so that they could meet with her if they wanted to discuss any matters that they had around their academic career. And we did that. I think we had 58 tutors that could go, and 34 of them went to Masabata and got academic advising. And they actually went back again at a later stage. So that helped to some degree. But to go further this year, my colleague and I have found a venue where they can go and sit and study as a study venue for only tutors. The reason we're trying to do that is this incentive of sorts, where you're giving so much of your time to our program, the least we could do is try to meet you halfway with your studies. So that's something that we're trying to get going, and hopefully we should have it by the start of the next semester. And then on the issue of recruitment, what we try and do is have a recruitment base of largely senior tutors. And the reason we do that is so that we don't lose some of the information or the knowledge that they've acquired and the skills that they've acquired from year on year. And another smaller part, about 20% this year, are new tutors. And the idea behind that is they will be mentored by the senior tutors, so that by the time the senior tutors move on to academic jobs or move on to another industry job, they would have at least imparted some of the skills that they had to the newer tutors. And so that's the approach that we try and have with regards to the recruitment.
Thanks, Sivuyil. You've turned your
questions?
presentation into a tutorial.
It seems like it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, colleagues. We shall see you tomorrow morning here at 9 o'clock for our keynote speaker, Dr. Michael Sorrell, the president of Paul Quinn College. May I bid you farewell and hope you drive safe. And please do remember to tweet about your experience here. Okay, thank you then.